I spent like nearly a decade helping multinational manufacturers establish North American distribution, sales, marketing. If I'm this effective at building businesses for others, why don't I do it for me? If you understand who you are and what people you have value to, that's like life becomes really easy. Then you only have to think about is how do I start laying out breadcrumbs to make them come to me? I don't know the answers to those things, but I do know that having a process and continue to work down it makes it fit really well. Kyle, how are we doing?
Oh, look what I got set up.
You got something going on here. Where are you in your office? Or are you on vacation?
I'm in New York in a fancy studio.
In a fancy studio. Well, now you got the wheels turning because I'm sure like a lot of guests, I have the unfancy Amazon assembled studio here. So like, how good could it be? Like,
oh my gosh! So Martina and I are in New York, and the Manhattan Lab, which is here in New York, which I've recorded out of before. We were like, we've got to record another episode of Building Stack List. So while we're here, we might as well go to the lab and record. And then we just decided to do it just before you and I talking. And so
I get the premium. No. Let me reframe this.
Premium.
Let me reframe this intro here. He was having a call with me and he thought, I have to do this other thing for work. I might as well go to the premium lab, because I know Grady's got the fish tank set up here where he's going to have the fish on display. How are we going to come with that? No, totally. It looks great. It looks great. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you're putting out there with Building Stack Lists as well too. So it's, it's putting that content out. I was thinking about as I'm preparing myself for this call today and talking with you, I was thinking about humanity, like what we're all doing. And I just want to say right off the top, watching through a bunch of the episodes you had of Zero to putting yourself on camera continues to be one of those wall differentiators for anyone right now. Like, and I think as progressively more and more that we do involves, I don't even want to say that the 2-letter word, but like automation, finding ways to take your humanity and put it in the forefront is going to always continue to lead. And I think for now, video is one of those big frontiers. So yeah, good on you. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I started to think about just before you got here, Grady's going to help us sell so much that I'm going to be doing like media calls and all sorts of stuff. So this is just good practice for like, of being on like Money Talk or Money Line or, well, I tell you the IPO. So
I think, so one of the things that I'm doing a lot now, which I love is like, it is an automation factor, right? Let me just say that maybe we should resharpen the messaging of that statement and say, Grady will help identify how to increase the scale of what I can do to sell a lot, right? Okay, that's maybe but when you pair, I do know this for certain, again, like we were saying a few minutes ago, adding your authenticity to that pipeline creates authority, right? And those kind of 3 things, what are they? Here, let's keep doing math here all of a sudden. So what do they add up to? They create a lot of luck, and luck is preparation meets opportunity, right? And so again, the more luck you can put out there, the more opportunity you're going to have. And the more that you, like, as you mentioned, the more that you find ways to leverage media like that, or places, or just even authentic putting yourself out there, the easier it is to open every conversation you have around the people that are coming to you. Because theoretically, they're already coming to you knowing already what you want to tell them. And what are we doing? We're getting on the call. We're affirming that belief. We're affirming that behavior, and we're always aligning, So yeah, I think I've nurtured the messaging here now a little bit.
Yeah. There you go. I love it. As I think about so let's go back. So we've got your company, Rising Tides, which we're working together on figuring out that identification and workflow and how we can start getting the messaging out to the right audiences for Stacklist. But if we go back prior to Rising Tides and your company, What's the sort of history that gets you to the place where you start rising tides? Like what was a little bit of the for people that don't know, your history that led you to the entrepreneurial moment?
Interest, I think, is the big thing. Like, let me preface this by saying that I have found a degree of success in my career that I'm so proud of. And that degree of success is based entirely on the fact that I've found ways to continue to build my career around things that interest me. And a big part of what interests me is working with lots of different businesses from all across every industry, every vertical, and also backgrounds. But working with these businesses and understanding how they connect with people, what are commonalities, what are through lines, and then like starting to identify what the best practices are across all of that. And that leads me to like really understanding the position now where with rising tides, we technically build distribution for people. And I frame it that way because having spent a career doing this now, that's really my mindset around it. I think about like the Pepsi Colas of the world. And another food and beverage would be the alcohol industry and how effective establishing distribution is for them. Because what it means is once you outlie your distribution, and there's lots of different ways to do that. There's direct, multi-channel with partners, etc. But like putting that distribution means then as a company and a brand, then you can focus on creating products, that answer what people within the distribution network want, and you can focus on the messages. So I started building Rising Tide off the commonality of what a lot of my clients as a fractional CMO, CRO, and other leadership roles that I've had around that. I've spent an entire career, fortunately, building omni-channel distribution for B2B companies is a real simple way to put it. Um, the last 8 years or so, I've done that independently, working primarily with a lot of tech businesses, but across the base, I do serve from early stage companies up to SMBs, up to 100 million sales is really targets of ours. And looking at, again, across that entire range, one aspect that I love is how do I take working with a global manufacturer, for instance, with not even country, but multi-continent distribution. How can I mirror that sort of like go-to-market model with smaller businesses down to startups? And today, like with the AI, just expediting automation. Like I said, automation to me was always the key. AI is just kind of like driving that a little faster. But now we can do that. So all of Rising Tides really is built off the background of seeing a lot of go-to-market models and thinking now like, now we can do this with a lot less. And then the interest part of it comes down to this. Once you start thinking about that, how much less can you do? And how you
Mm.
get the most out of like what you have, so it's really the interest that drives it down. And if I was really to break it down in a simple thing, it's like I love helping people build their go to market because each one is a chance to see what works for them. You know what I mean? And that's really special, so.
Before, like, if we go back in your history, did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family, or did you have a sort of a traditional path that then sort of veered into starting your own company, or what was the sort of groundwork that was laid for starting and doing your own thing?
That's a great question. Not really. Not I don't have really. Well, I should say there are. Um, as you mentioned that, my first instinct would be to no, because I think of my immediate family and I think of what they did, and they're great people, hardworking, very focused, very. There's a lot that I carry about it that I put into my business, right? Um, but then my godfather was an entrepreneur, struggled in the restaurant industry. I do have relatives that have started their business. One of my cousins, who I helped to be a little part of his story, just sold his SaaS as an acquisition. So there is proximity, right? The nepotism for me happened, and then it took me a long time to realize that it had happened. So when I was in college, I remember in one of my last business courses in college, I was a dual major, global business management and then marketing. And I was doing like an entrepreneurial class. And the group that I was in, we just every sort of activity that we did as we built the class, we just continually were 5 to 7 years ahead of everybody else. Like and I realized it kind of at the time while we were doing it. When we finished up, we just blew away the rest of the class as far as like results and how we drove
Nice.
through. And then I got out of school, and for some reason, all of that group went on to start their own businesses. And I was like, you guys are suckers. I'm going to go work for a big company. Right. And
Right.
it took me about 6 years or 7 years or so of working in a couple of large organizations to realize that the small business environment or the entrepreneurial environment fit me a lot better. But I'm really thankful because I take a lot of those lessons. Again, like I think one of the advantages it gave me is it gives me that mindset of how do I steal from big and go to small, right? How do we do that? And so that positioned me to do that. Even saying that, I spent another 6 years or so building companies um, for multinationals. I spent like nearly a decade helping multinational manufacturers establish North American distribution, sales, marketing, and distribution entirely for them. So I was building companies for that entire time. And it took an embarrassing long amount of time for me to realize if I'm this effective at building businesses for others, why don't I do it for me? So don't be ashamed. I guess what I'm saying out of that is whenever you feel the urge to do those things, I think recognize it. And one thing I've learned in life is like one of the benefits of just being alive is that it's all a series of decisions. And the next decision is the most important one. So even if it's completely radical from what you are, you can be something entirely new. And that's okay. That's good. Um, so yeah. And then you come to realize that most entrepreneurs really start branching out in their late 30s to 40s. And so like that's part of I think the fallacy of the startup and the tech idea is that like you see a lot of the entrepreneurs that pop when they're young. Well, those 7 to 10 peoples that are going to fill your X of X list, they're only representative of such a micro fraction of the community. And there's so many that are around the age that I'm at now that are launching and selling successful businesses. So
I think there's probably a good number of people that did fairly similar to what you and I did, which was going through the sort of traditional, I'll call it the like college white picket fence job ladder, corporate sort of flow, and then went like, I think for me, I did that, huge companies and big brands and all these things, but then you get to that sort of like just below whatever the top tier
yeah,
executive sort of level is, and you go like, I don't know if that's what I want. Like, you ever since high school and the idea of the resume and jobs, and you're gonna get in, you're gonna work yourself up. Then you sort of go through that process, and then you go, oh, I don't know. I don't know if that's actually like, I think I might want to go like this and
yeah.
just go off on a different path.
We're at the end of the day, we're all based on the experiences we have. And like I said, that information changes us. And I think we always need to recognize that. So like I do think like the learning from that is I mean, you see this all the time, regardless of your background. Um, you know, entrepreneurship is never easy, even when you're experienced and you're like have all the experience of helping others. That now, one thing I did when I left that company and started off on my own is I launched a social selling platform for B2B businesses in the early teens. And it was way too early. It was way too ambitious, and it solved so many things that were needed, but nobody knew that they needed, right? So that was a huge lesson in itself. But to support myself in doing that, then I launched I took the experience I had building companies. I launched myself as a fractional CMO and CRO. And this was back still in the dial-up days. So I'm embarrassed to say that.
I love it.
But that experience, in one way that I always landed customers and I think has always helped customers, is that each of those, I view each client that I work with, whether it's as a fractional or now with the agency or helping businesses use the products I've launched, I look at them through the lens of like, okay, I really know what I'm doing in this certain instance, but how are they applying it? What I look, it's totally evaluation of me and myself in doing my business. And I'm sometimes embarrassed, but not really embarrassed to say that like every one of those occasions, even working with you and seeing how well you respond to interactions coming in and how you handle the presentation and like sharing about your business. I'm a fractional CMO, and one of the most complicated things I have is explaining how my business works. And
Right.
even at that, I'm saying having the benefit of working with a lot of business owners, you still learn. It still doesn't guarantee you potential success, but what it does allow me to do is quickly, if I do place myself in your shoes, which I try to all the time, I try to understand where my next mistake is going to come from.
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so that's one of the values, and I think I'm appreciative as more and more work is decentralized, that more people get the opportunity to see that. They get to see what organizational success and failure looks like across the broader span. And hopefully that helps them either bring organizational success or build it on their own to others.
Right.
Yeah.
What was so from the journey of starting your own, you started a B2B SaaS sales product. It was too early. And you start doing sort of fractional CMO, CFO work. And I'm assuming that's bringing in revenue, but you're also starting to seed clients potentially does that sort of parlay into rising tides, or what was some of the impetus or the narrowing into where you're at today?
Sure. So one of the things when you're a fractional leader, whether it's from a sales side or a marketing side, is it really, you're only as good as your team, right? And so early on, I started to build a network. I was looking for team members I could bring between projects, find success, and building that network and knowing like if it's this type of a client or this type of a customer, they work in this industry. This is the general go-to-market stack. So I was always doing that and assembling it. And then of course, um, up until very recently, up until I launched Rising Tides, and I really kind of started focusing on that, I was always working on another startup in the side too. So there was that problem of, again, you're always building a team so you can lead the core thing and then have the thing on the side. I'm borrowing my team. They've got resources there, and I can also have a wider interview pool, which as a startup, you don't get to have that insight. So there was kind of these whole dual self-serving things that happened. But one of the things I did during that is that first startup was as a social commerce platform. I recognized the need for a basically a protocol of data, multiple data, as a matter of fact. I'd worked with Amazon as they were building out their B2B program, which is now really full on running. And one of the biggest holes I thought in that arsenal at that time was that they did a great job and still do a great job of the customer experience and customer data, giving customers data, including marketing data. That's a clear product of Amazon. But one of the things they didn't do well, and most distribution partners don't do, is they provide product data and also like customer data back to their manufacturing partners. So I started working in with that. I started following down the blockchain whole was like, oh yeah, of course now I need to have a protocol, or a protocol needs to be run on this and da da da. So you can see where it got divested, but it did lead me to these questions about organizational change. And before I launched my agency, I launched a DAO, which was, I had already had this network and I wanted to put together an organization that basically took the strength of the network, but also multiplied it by turning like every seller into like a partner. It's sort of like an MLM sort of structure, but one that is even flatter and like everybody's the owner sort of a deal. And
And for
unfortunately,
those that don't know, the DAO is
yeah,
essentially you do have an organization that is decentralized and based on what you own on the blockchain gives you rights to vote. And so it's kind of like having a decentralized board of directors that get to sort of vote on should we do this, should we not do this.
it's like employee owned companies on steroids, right?
Right. Yeah.
As you can tell, like one of the things I like is I like experimentation. And so, what I can say with some certainty is that those organizations can be very effective when they're super focused. Being a marketing or a sales provider has a lot of different aspects. So then you bring in a lot of mindsets. The lesson from that is if you're taking on doing a difficult thing, growing a business, or like being really like focusing on a niche or a product type, it's also really challenging to do another difficult thing, which is like having a really unusual organizational structure. But from that experience, I gained a lot of, as far as knowing when I ran my own business, when I built an agency model, I guess I should say, transitioning into, I had different ideas about like, it doesn't have to be the organizational structure. It can just be the leadership and management culture that really affects how businesses ran out. And so, um, the through line on all that is now, at this point, to myself and members of the team, we're leading marketing agencies across a couple of different industries and go to market functions. And I'm kind of involved with the pinnacle of a lot of that. I had at that point joined a venture team, and I was an angel investor for a long time before that, and then started like being part of that decision structure, and also thinking about like working at a venture firm, and marketing is an interesting point too, because it's a lot like partner marketing. One thing we always knew is you can't really ever say anything, but you can like say things about things.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, I'm even phrasing that term in the mindset is that's the way, because you can't have any investment advice at anything, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
then I'm moving through a lot of that. And then I started to think about, again, what's the core thing about me that makes sense, which is like, how can I trick other people into paying me to continue my education? Right.
Right.
By also like, let me turn that around. A core line on that is, I found that all my success has come through creating alignment. So how can I understand what makes Kyle and his business tick, and understand people that can benefit from that, help Kyle get the benefit out of that. So much so that like there's a financial overflow, and they don't even think about what it is like working with Grady. So, um, and so I started breaking down. This is when, like I said, as a marketer, it comes to how what are we doing? Like, what do we ultimately want to do? And I started thinking about like my sphere of influence or my pipeline, and what I really wanted about out of it. And I determined at that time, I started mapping out like, well, these are all the types of scenarios I like working with, and it relates to these people. Um, and then I started thinking about like my quote unquote offers or core functions or whatever you want to think about this. And I broke it down, and I realized like, okay, well, for me to get to the right people, I have to have a lot of qualifications, right? To understand who the right person is. So how do I first start to see that? I got to give them something for free. And then I've got to like give them something for free, which would be content, and then build some sort of engagement with them so I can see how they use it. That's going to allow me to see like
Mm-hmm.
the effects of my impact at scale. And then the agency kind of fell into it, because I was like, well, what's the next step? How do I get people to start doing what I really believe in, and get an idea of how well they take that, and how well it impacts their business, and how much advice or how much like latitude I'll have like in leading them. So the agency gave me um, insight into that. So that's really the interesting thing, is the core part of the Rising Tides agency is helping people build pipeline for their business. It's also our core pipeline, our distribution. Like, we practice what we
Mm.
preach. Everything we give to
Right.
others is exactly what we do. So part of that snake eating its own tail is we get better with every client, and then we can
Totally.
turn around and just keep being like, this is what's going to make you better because it works, right? So
Exactly. That's how you and I met, right?
yeah, I think exactly. And then I
I
think I
think
was
I
like,
was in a workflow.
yeah, and I was like, here, try to do some of these things, because I know that they're working. And then a couple months later, you came back and you said, okay, I think I want to like talk to you about like how we can take a next small step in that. I'm like, great, perfect. And you see this proofed out. Like, I hope one of the things that a listener is taking away from this is like, if you understand who you are and what people you have value to, then it's like life becomes really easy. Then you only have to think about is like, again, the build distribution or pipeline model. How do I start laying out breadcrumbs to make them come to me? And it's all about giving it away for free, until the value is so much there that it doesn't make sense not to work with you, right? So,
Right.
um,
What was the time frame between sort of you broke off, you were doing the B2B, and then you had the experimentation period, and then Rising Tides like as a full focus?
yeah, so there was coursework in between there. So like I had interestingly enough, I had launched a decentralized contract platform, which I was really excited about. So there's always like through lines with everything. So I love
You and I were deep in the blockchain, like
well,
crypto world for
I
a
I
while.
think like to be honest, I think decentralized internet and decentralized work are the two large movements of this generation, I should say. And maybe it doesn't get as much street cred, but it's also because like, to me, when I got out of working in Web3 or like blockchain or crypto full time, it was a big reason was because like for a long time, it was all about driving adoption with the key players. And then the key players got there. And then it was like, well, what point is it? Now it's like, now it's being integrated in Amazon. It's in Starbucks systems. Meta's got it full, it's everywhere on the back end. And that's what we always wanted. Like it's a back end product. So then I started thinking about like, well, what's the next business step? Where am I seeing all this success at? And I started launching it as a course. And like, again, the interesting thing about that is I was using, I was taking something that I was working through myself and in turn selling other people and working with a lot of fractionals and leaders. I started to see through them like real commonalities. And then it became clear to me what to do. So one takeaway that I would make is like, you're always building a business and you should always be considering too that like part of this whole lifetime of events is I'm also building a network or a pipeline, a distribution
Hmm.
channel, an audience really. And like if you're aware of that and you're able to continue to nurture key touch points, like all of it continues to add up and adds value and they build on top of each other. So a lot of people I think don't, when they jump, they think that there's no real through line between for instance, the first couple years I was really in construction, industrial, these trades markets working. I was going into like nuclear power plants and garbage facilities, and like at the same time, working on Boeing planes. Oh, never mind. Strike that from this. But working with people that were doing that thing. So vastly different. But nowadays, as technology is integrated into every single market, like I can come in with a unique perspective because I understand the sales channels for those integrated verticals. So so again, the core takeaway is it doesn't always have to be clear and clean. And each of these business steps from when I got out of college and went into sales and started building sales teams. That was 3 to 5 years. And then I became a sales leader. And that led me to the opportunity where I got back into marketing and I was establishing omni-channel marketing strategies, right?
Hmm.
And doing that, the, the odd thing is I was also building distribution teams. So like, where does that play into all of this next focus on like helping people with go to market, building business, and then eventually focusing on a lot of tech to do that? Well, when you've got physical products and it comes down to building distribution and warehousing, P&Ls really matter a lot because money and logistics or space is finite. And so that helped reframe again a lot of the way that I look at how people build their go to market, because I think a lot of times you think about throwing paid acquisition, throwing funny money into a space, but there is a cost of like the money and the mindset that has in an organization. Is it is, for instance, paid acquisition, which can drive a lot of users for an early company, is that a real high value activity versus like automated sales outreach? Because you can highly qualify users. So you might get less volume, but
Right.
at an early stage company, doing less with better clients and the ability to then manipulate their product and maybe find additional opportunity is a valuable thing over just blowing out your acquisition.
Right. I think about that. We sort of went through that process that when you're first starting and you first start thinking about fundraising, and of course everybody's talks about and wants this sort of hockey stick, up and to the right kind of thing,
Was yeah.
and and that feels like what you should be driving for. But we started earlier this year, on our biggest thing is I just wanted to see throughput through the network, that it was working. It wasn't falling apart. It was working. It all sort of worked as intended. And so we did paid acquisition on Facebook and Instagram to drive to 10,000 users. But then once we got there, I just shut those off, because it was like that was the goal achieved. I didn't want to keep throwing money at it.
Yeah.
Do I need 15 now? Do I need 20? Like, just to sort of show that the chart is like going up, up, up. Because also working in social, I've seen so many times, I've run social for people who have 4 million followers, but then when they send out a post on X or do something on Instagram, you get 20 likes. And you're sort of like, you can really see that that base is not actually there. It
Yeah.
just looks nice to think that you've got 4 million followers. But so we actually cut it off. And what was really interesting is to obviously it goes back down, but then you start watching what happens organically after that.
Yeah.
And you start to actually see the true organic. And then with what we're working on is to start those automated flywheels of seeing what messaging is really working. And for me, I think as a CEO, I'm split in 50 different directions, but what I'm what I'm most excited about is you and I working on a flywheel or that starts to work, that starts to drive revenue that I can actually forecast on.
Yeah.
Because right now, the cost per acquisition for Instagram was 68 cents, but how well is that actually sort of converting into an upgrade or a paid, and that takes a long time. And you've got investors in the meantime saying like, but show me what this looks like. And they want all the data. And so actually working on a flywheel that starts working and driving revenue that we can then extrapolate out what that looks like if we were to drive more through this path and then also find an adjacency and now add 2 or 3 from my
Continue to learn.
perspective.
Yeah.
Right. But from my perspective, what I love is then getting that set and then being able to go do other things and to know that can sort of keep going versus in the beginning, there's so much founder led sales, right? Where it's me just like tapping my network and trying to talk to Bill or Sue, and I hope they sign up. And takes so much time and effort that immediately being able to sort of work on these automated marketing channels and have that and get that solid is a no-brainer once you
Well,
start
and
playing with it.
the thing, so I talk about building distribution. Again, the reason I like that is because like distribution builds out over time, right? It's like you start with one, not even a warehouse. You start shipping out of the back of your office and then eventually build up the volume to have a warehouse, and you've got partners that get out of the warehouse. It becomes all these spokes. And then all of a sudden you have 2 warehouses. Like I like In and Out a lot for the food, but also for the idea, like they won't expand unless they can put in their own locations and control the food within that next access, that's a great model to build out around. About there's a lot of control implied. So maybe there's some control issues there, but it does lend to believe if that's the core thing, is delivering this piece and having that always be that and have that sort of satisfaction. So with distribution too, unlike funnels and other aspects, it's like the reason I like that mentality is it clearly stages things, right? Over time, as it grows, how you stage it and the complexity of those stages do change too. Like the delivery models change, a lot of things change, but also there's a ton of data. And I think again, the through point of like us both working in a decentralized aspect, one, I would bet you would agree with this. I love bringing things to people. Like that's great. Just bring it right to them and then let them do whatever they want with them. And I love that that's where we're heading into now. But more importantly is it's all if I was to put all of my general go-to-market model and actually everything I kind of believe in about life, it's like it's all about conversation. And the beauty part of it is the more automation, the more you build out distribution and you do it through conversation, that's all trackable data, right? Whether it's this recorded episode or every single sales call, like internal call that I do with teams, that whole communication, everything I do on Slack, everything that we build together as far as messaging on cold outreach, email, etc., all of that stuff can be mined now at the speed of like nothing and give us information about what do people want us to be? Right. And so then when you're talking about like when it comes time to scale, now you've been building out your own infrastructure of how you communicate with people, right? You send like going back to distribution again. What do liquor companies do? Every month, this is the promotion, send out the pack. It goes on the same truck as the boxes of wine. And then they go to who brings it out? Humans bring it out and they give it out to the bar or whoever owner, right? So it's a clear model of sending your message out that you own and control. But then on top of it, it's all about local markets, what people want. And it's really easy to win and to be successful when it's about alignment. And up until that point, you can build it all around Kyle. But at some point, sneakily, like just like Dave Thomas and Wendy's, like they sneak out of the picture, the idea of what Kyle was becomes much bigger than what Kyle is inside the business. And then it's really, what is that built on? What everybody wants Kyle to be. Right. And all you need to do then from an outside sales perspective, from a marketing message, is just make sure you don't like say and do things that fall people out of alignment with what people expect. So
Right. Yeah.
then it becomes a lot, again, it's a scalable model, and it becomes something that like moves really easily out of the founder's hands. And that's one of the aspects I've seen now is like there's this all this opportunity with people that have built SaaS companies in particular over the last 10 to 20 years. And one of the hardest handoffs of being like they can't establish growth outside of either them or a core salesperson. Uh, but it's because they're, quite to put it frankly, they're so focused on having the perfect message that they've developed, which works really well. But it also works really well if you just like listen and let people talk into the sale and you know how to nurture
Right.
that. And that's scalable. Anybody can, you can train anybody to do that. Yeah.
Well, and working yourself out of a job is, that's essentially, I've always tried to do that in any position, is get to a place where, it's scary for some people. I've always enjoyed it. I get to a
Yeah.
place where I don't really have that much to do because the machine is working. Everybody's got their focus, and that gives me the ability to stay up top and sort of look at everything strategically versus I got to be in each sale and I got to be in each deal. But I love that idea of, would you say that would be one of your bigger recommendations for startups when, first you get your product, it's working, you can actually start to sell it in a more automated way, is to start that um, as early as possible, trying to work yourself out of sales?
Yes. Because again, that's been another core secret of mine is that like in it's not like it's badly kept secret because it's usually one of the first things I tell clients as a fractional. My job is to build you a system. Like my job isn't to like be the marketing and the strategy and the execution or any of that stuff. My job is to build you whatever is a team. Like a business is really a team plus a system, right? So that's as the CEO, that's your core job, right? Is your core? It really comes down to any business is process plus culture. And both of those things are extremely fungible, right? So like the first thing of becoming successful, I think, as any leader, but particularly a CEO, is bringing other people to not necessarily make the mistakes for you, but like, I guess here's a key indicator on it. Bringing other people that will make the mistakes alongside you and very loudly point out when you're making the mistakes. And then also people that will push you to do that handoff sooner, you know, because I think regardless of however I always tell myself, like I brought on part of what we did with Rising Tides is I built a content team first to help me market myself better. Right.
Hmm.
And, that really helped me learn the lesson faster with experts than I could ever learn on my own independently. But yeah, that's one of the key success factors. What I keep kind of seeing as a through line that's interesting. I'm curious if you've seen this with yourself. Certainly with my business, there's always this like rush to expand the team, bring in the experts again as we go and find different stuff. And then as we start to like really truly figure out the key success factors for that team or department, it goes much, much smaller. And now with AI, it's even getting smaller than that, not because they're taking our jobs, but because I'm stealing this from Adam Robinson of B2B. He talks about bringing humanity into the core things he does. And I think I've thought about that quote a lot since I met with him and interviewed him. Because, like with AI now, it's one of the core things that we need to do as business owners and any automation is determine where the humanity needs to be in that department or that role and then
Hmm.
maximize that and really find people that do that. That means the core functions of roles and departments that humans are holding is a lot tighter, but it's so
Right.
much more impactful, right? And you can kind of see
Yep.
that like, I mean, I don't think we've ever talked about that directly, but in the core product that we do, like you can kind of see like we're trying to help put a lot of sales activity around the idea of Kyle so that like Kyle, you don't even need to be involved in each of those interactions long term moving forward, but selectively you can be involved in the most impactful ones, whether they're for you or for the other person. And those things drive your business. That's the ineptness of content.
And this, totally, and saving, to your point about, it's almost like concentrating the humanity. So if I think about myself, I
Yeah,
think about the areas where, we use Riverside, shout out Riverside, which I love.
love it too.
but one of those things that we're going to get done with this episode, and I can actually go in and use the sort of magic system, and it's going to cut a lot of the pieces together. And then I'm going to ask it to find some highlights, and then it's going to pull those together. And that's automating a process that I might have to normally spend a bunch of other time sort
Yeah.
of doing it, that time is not beneficial for me to be like picking apart little pieces of content to try and figure it out. It's to do this, is to connect with you, and and to have this conversation, and then to be able to get out and sort of spread that message. But all the pieces in between, the same, whether it's writing a contract from a legal perspective, there is the sitting down, negotiating at the table and sort of talking about what we want to do from a company perspective, but sitting and nitpicking all the little
Yeah.
forthwith, like all the sort of stuff that you have to go through. That's not the where I should be spending my time. So I love that idea of basically looking at each of your departments or team members and then figuring out how do you maximize or concentrate, like get the really good pulp of the orange concentrate of where that person's skills and abilities and humanity, outward facing needs to be, and then what can you augment using AI to sort of make the other processes that are more sort of task based faster.
Yeah. And I think one thing when I was watching an earlier episode of yours, um, it was with VaynerX, the chief heart officer,
Claude, yeah.
And she brought out a really good point about uh, fit. And I think about alignment a lot. And I think about like the interesting thing is I have a book forthcoming called Build Distribution Surprise. But like the one thing I talk about in that, it started off thinking about like, how can I help people with what I do, is this pipeline building, this co-distribution, this model, this whole idea. And then increasingly as I was writing it, I realized that it really it addresses another whole part of a conversation that every business owner has, which is like building the distribution of our employees, the HR side of things, the culture side of our business is like very much the same thing. And when I was listening to Claude talk about it and thinking about alignment and how she phrased it in that really well-known organization that has that whole like that's one of the virtues and values, is finding fit, determining how they can culturally bring people in and things. I've realized through working in all these organizations is that like just like employees have shown me, is that you have these cycles with all of these different, a lot of decentralized fractional people or agencies where you get
Mm-hmm.
close and you move far away, you get close and move far away. And part of the distribution mentality around that is accepting that like people that come in orbit with you will most likely always be in orbit with you. And so you don't really need to be close all the time, but you always want to create resources and opportunity and conversation that keep the space open to be close when you need it and it makes sense. And when the interesting part of that is, as I've started to understand that a lot more in the hiring, firing, retaining, bringing back of individuals, it helps me a lot with the perspective of like reframing sales automation, or internally too with like the product journeys, the digital journeys that people have and the
Mm-hmm.
user journeys that people have, and thinking about it in terms of that, like the impact that I have on somebody using the products is as valuable as I have as an employer. And there's a social responsibility to that. There's a whole aspect of it. So how can I continue to find ways to establish that in a sense that I'm building for the long? I always know that like the next connection should be theoretically more quote unquote valuable because the impact's deeper and there's shared experience that leads on to it. So I don't know the answers to those things, but I do know that like
Yeah.
having a process and continue to work down it makes it fit really well.
What's next for Rising Tides? Like if you were to look, 1 year or 3 years in the future, where do you want to steer the ship?
Sure. So again, Rising Tides is really just a product within the ecosystem for me to get closer to the people I want to. So this is a great question. Um, when I started out a year ago, I thought a lot about like adding distribution and media through like traditional media. Like we're building out like more podcasts, having more opportunities where I'm able to have my voice carried out louder. And I still think that that's a valuable aspect. Writing the book is a part of that. Creating another opportunity, creating more avenues for people to have thinner slices of you that can aid introduce them, start to position, and then give you the opportunity to see from a different vantage point, a new angle, like who you are, what you should be, those sort of things. For Rising Tides itself, we're continuing to look on the edge of how do we continue to automate, like I said, conversations that start around like bringing people in, but down the long run, like also helping businesses maintain that conversation throughout product use, the entire map, like through bringing them back in, communication within the products. That's part of the aspect of it. But the short version of that is thinking about like how can we take the pipeline building model, the automation model that we're doing around basically growing new customers in through conversation, and take that same mindset to other functions. And actually, I'm really excited because we've been doing this with social. And like I said, I launched Rising Tide to give me a content team. But in the contraction stage now, we've figured out a way to leverage tools now to help us bring really high impactful content with very little overhead. Essentially, like what you're talking about before, how do you leverage the interactions you have to find value in what you do and then turn that into something that the best content to me is sharing a strong interaction, positive or negative, so people can get a representative of who you are and then they can bring themselves to that sort of scenario. So that's one aspect. But
I
ultimately,
love.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, ultimately, it comes down to this. I'm old enough or mature. No, I'm old enough to know that as I began building the idea around build distribution, around the ecosystem of Grady and launched Rising Tides as a mechanism for that, one of the key aspects is that, like, if you have the entrepreneurial mindset or the learner's mindset, you know that like the Hermosi family and Gary Vayner, who we talked about before, and multiple other examples, your the true ability for you to really capture that extends beyond one business. It becomes like a sort of multi conglomerate sort of mentality. And I like the Hermosi example really well because one of the things that I think that they did very successfully is they found an audience segment and then they wrapped product solutions around them of all varying types that
Hmm.
really support that one audience. And then it became super easy to become highly valuable to a tight group of people. That's an easily replaceable model, right? Like you can take that mindset, apply it to whatever industry or function that you care about, and you can really do that. So with mine, I guess the thing is I want to just continue to keep finding the opportunity to see great products like yours that make me excited, try to like work with you as long as I can to put systems and process in place, whether it's directly, whether it's with the Rising Tides team or it's some other organization where, you know, we've got SaaS tools and likely in the future, not to take the hat off of it too much, but I don't think I'm the first person that thought like developing an LLM that like really understands a lot of what we're doing and is hyper focused on that aspect is a real strong option too. So there's lots, I think everybody, you break your offer into like what's my mind can do, what I can do with my body, what tools do I use to get it done? How do I turn those tools into SaaSes for other people? What's the back end of that? And then it keeps going down. What's the data set that you can turn it on? What's the
Right.
content that makes? So that's the pipeline model. And I guess if you want to see it and done more effectively, go look at the Hermosis. Look at Greg Eisenberg is another great example. There's Justin Walsh, Matt Gray. Um, all of these examples that I've shared to me feel like they're motivated most by getting through the day excited. So yeah. So
I like that idea of you were talking about, if I think about it, sort of, you and I are working on one distribution channel, but also especially for startup founders, and you're getting hit all the time. I get emails and LinkedIn's all the time. Don't you want to write a book? And I can help you with your presence on LinkedIn. And don't you want to be on podcasts? And like, but that idea of being able to help sort of package and launch yourself as an ecosystem that happens to have multiple offerings or services in there, is something that, yeah, is highly valuable. Because I think even as a founder, all of a sudden you're thinking, I have to become, an Instagrammer, and I have to become a podcaster, and I've got to become a writer, and I've got to become a sales expert, and and all these sort of different things. But to be able to sort of do little proof of concepts on a couple of distribution and
Yeah.
content channels, and test those out and start to get good at them, would be
It
huge.
just takes patience and time. One of my neighbors owns a printing company. And again, I try to just draw everything I do, I just try to draw examples from some other places. And as you think about it, um, one of the things that I love about SMBs, business owners like that, is a lot of them, what do they end up doing? He's got a printing company. So then he buys a building. That building is a business that operates off of his other business to be successful. The marketing company, yeah, I'm client one, but it also gives me the resources and it allows me to like scale out what I'm doing too. And what's necessary for that is adding distribution channel, a newsletter business, a YouTube channel business, a podcast. Those things are kind of all come into court. You don't have to be, I don't have to be Barstool Sports with that level, but what does it take to get successful? Well, to be able to afford one printing machine, you've got to get a couple of people bought in you and what you can do. And then eventually, as you get that, then you can scale it. You can add in other resources and that same model step by step. And it comes down to how we evaluate success. I think the fallacy of like the 0 to 100, like that upward into the right.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Upward into the right mentality is that it glosses over all of the wins and it makes you assume that the win is here over here on the right side. So that's not the win. Most of the wins, like every startup founder that's done anything successful or anybody in that environment, it's all in here, way off the map,
1,000 little iterations that
right?
happen to sort of get
Everybody, the biggest winners in the decentralized industry were all people Bitcoin 0 to 100, right? Even if they sold it, you can just tell. And like I said, too, going back to my experience in that, I felt a lot of satisfaction over the last year and a half or so watching the financial industry adopt, knowing that we had done traditional methods. We were talking to these individuals, these regulators, and now it's there. Not because the battle's won, but because now, like I think in that curve, they're on the upswing now. They're in the
right.
playing field, right? And so
Hmm.
now, like others can join in the journey and win, right? But for the hard ones that fought it, they're not going to take any more, I think, personal satisfaction or gratification when it goes from Bitcoin 120 to a million than they would when it went from 10 to 100, right? That was the battle. So, I think just figure out how you can frame success in your life and then shoot for that every single day and ignore everything else, I guess. The rest, it really is just noise.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So what would your leaving with let's say there's somebody out there who's just starting their business or they're early in their journey, leaving a good nugget of wisdom for one of those people is, what would you say to somebody that had 2K or 5K or 10K in the bank and they're thinking about starting into marketing and distribution channels? What would you focus on if you were in that position? What would you focus on to start? Let's say, let's take out, I'm just going to dump money into Facebook and Instagram ads. Let's take that out of the mix. If it was, what would you focus on first?
Well, the clear thing of any business, or I guess any individual too, is like try to get a really clear understanding of it. Comes down to this. Everything is core function and audience. That's everything in life, right? If you using ads as an example, what can you run ads on? Topics, which is function, or audience, right? But it really comes down to the better you can understand what it is, a thing that someone will pay you to do, right? You don't need to understand why it's important or all that. You need to understand what that is and be able to simply communicate that. Like that's step A. It takes, and you really don't want to do a lot. You don't want to bring in other people and spend money until you have a good understanding of where that starts at. Now, I'm not saying like that means you have an offer and a landing page and you're highly converting. That's not going to happen right away. But then you can start, this sounds like really cliche, but do the founder selling, because every single aspect of your job as a founder and eventually a CEO is to be able to DIY and then explain to others, not necessarily how the job is done, but the key success factors to focus on that will continue to make the job relevant. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like
Well, and in that, so let's get tactical, because I think
Yeah.
about that. I think about how, as a founder, you hear all these things like you got to go pay for a website. So, oh my God,
You don't have to pay
I'm
for a
gonna go
website.
right. I got to go pay for a website, and then I've heard that I've got to make a real slick landing page, and so I go pay someone for a landing
You don't need
page,
a
and
landing page. Yep, keep going.
I got to hook it up to all the systems, and then I got to start like
You don't
paying for
need
ads.
systems either. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah,
I like this.
totally. But these are all the things I think that people who come in and just listen to all the different, all
Yeah.
the sort of input that they get. And so, and then you also hear you got to hook up all the data. So you got to get mixed panel, and you got to get a
How
mixed
you
panel
like.
sort of
Yep.
like strategist in there. And so, this is where I think it's really interesting, sort of demystifying that whole like, don't go down the path of what you think is the traditional, like you got to buy websites and landing pages and systems and processes, and you got to run ads just to learn all this stuff, because you're going to go spend 10, 15, 20, $30,000 trying to do all this stuff, and that doesn't mean that you'll actually get to know the other side of what you really need to
Yeah.
get to know, to your point of doing it manually, hand to hand or email to email or whatever it is, and learn those signals first before you put any money into the other
The
things.
funny thing about all of that, and again, this is like, if you think about the early Y Combinator companies too, like one of the most successful early Y Combinator, like I think it was Y Combinator, but one of the examples I always remember was Yelp. And they were like, they went in and they did all this product. The thing I love about YC is they work on the product, they get that all done. And then the Yelp team just literally went to all the restaurants. And the reason why I'm like hitting you over the head with that is, what do you need to get started? You need a database, first of all. Well, Google Sheets gives you that for free. Excel gives it doesn't matter what it is, right? Guess what? If you're putting information in a Google Sheet, Excel, or any sort of database, what does it eventually do? Integrate really well into any CRM. All top line CRMs and like data panels and all that stuff, they really work well with basic spreadsheets. So start with a database, right? And the second thing is you're the ad campaign, you're all of it. The thing is, so much of what, when I come down and I start to think about like, how do I go into paid ads, and I start automating that in AI, or like SEO as an example, there's a reason why the first core function that we really started focusing on driving in for people was outreach, because all of it comes down to sales at the end of the day. And even I'll boil it down more than that. Your whole experience of people working with your company is going to be human to human. And that's why sales is, whether it's just working through the app or whatever. So much of what we've done on social is to represent the human to human part of it. Like the great founder of Smart Leads, a product I use all the time, is very active, and they're always engaging. They're always doing like events and things. But that's because you can't be there with all of them. That's representative. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you need to get started today? Well, personally, I think there's 3 platforms that make a ton of sense. LinkedIn, totally underserved. And if you're in B2B, everybody's on there, regardless of industry, right? Um, so LinkedIn is cheap. It's cheap. You can throw up a landing page. It's called a profile for free. You can put an offer on that, and you can connect it to a Google Sheet or any other spreadsheet. Super easy. That's right away you have there. They also have, the other reason why I say LinkedIn, one of the core LinkedIn products is they have an email tool. It's the DMs. All the others built their DMs and everything. LinkedIn had it first, and they laid it out like Outlook, another Microsoft product. They laid it out like an email tool. So
Mm-hmm.
it also integrates really well with that same database. So now if you're spending any money, you can buy a LinkedIn Sales Navigator. You're spending $80 a month, but you don't need that either. You just need to start building the connections through there. So it provides access to people that don't have access to it. It's also a good place to establish authority. The better places to really, if you want to build off of an authority aspect, are YouTube and Reddit. And the reason why they're both excellent is because Reddit is like the new version of Quora, which is basically any forum. Answer people questions. Just answer the questions. And then if you answer the questions well and it's a good answer, it's going to drive business back to your company forever. Like, right?
And my tip on Reddit is just push through. If you get any negativity or any like meh, like or any like just push straight through it and ignore it and keep going. Once you get to the other side, it's so
Yeah.
effective and it's so great once you push into that, like, okay, I feel
The
comfortable
barrier
using
of
Reddit.
entry into it is humanity too. So again, why is it important to a founder to do it? You need to understand that, like you said, push through the layers of cringe and the wrong answers and everything. That gets you through. And once you're through that, once you've been through that battle, you have that as the armor now. Like, I know this because all the internet trolls, like the worst people that would come at me, already did. Right? You hear people in
Yeah.
startups say that. So, and then YouTube is great because it amplifies it. Both of those, actually, all three of those resources are SEO optimized. They do track in almost every system. So if you're good on those three, then you're going to get long tail aspects out of it. And you should be looking at them as like, how do I take this same message and put it to each of the three platforms? The other kind of key thing is, I don't know what to say about my product. Well, the thing is, you go to Reddit, you find somebody asking a question somewhat relevant to your stuff. All of your content ideas can come from really two places, YouTube and Reddit. Because if it performs on both of those platforms, all you need to do is restate it based off of your perspective, and you know people will resonate with it. It doesn't mean it's going to be successful. Packaging matters a lot, but that's where I would start off. And then from there, again, the next aspect is this is why I love outreach, is because basically it's founder-led sales, and it's going to keep you in the game long enough to get a lot of the answers and then come back into the game, as you're building your team, start to restructure. It also helps give you a lot of ideas, not just about your product, but like I said, the distribution mentality is, I'm important to these people and I want to be more so. Listening to them when they're telling you about their stuff and being on sales calls well beyond when you're supposed to gives you great insight into adjunct products and other things you can sell. And there might not be your business. Look at the Hermosis. Could be many other businesses. But it's a lot easier to be valuable to people that already love you and care about you. It's more valuable, I should
Totally.
say, than it is to convince somebody to meet you for the first time. So yeah. So that's where I would start. And the best part is, again, one of the key qualifiers of everybody who comes down the pipeline with me is people that have done it for themselves, And then another key qualifier is, hopefully I'm exuding this, is the desire to fail and the desire to let other people tell you you're failing and listen to them, contextualize what you think is important out of that, and then just move forward in that direction, whatever it is. So yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, this was so great. Thank you so much. And I'm, excited to hear about, your journey and how you got there. And I love the synchronicity of what your journey and eating your own dog food meant that we got to sort of meet. And now we're on this journey together, figuring out how to scale it and do distribution for Stacklist.
Yeah. I'll leave it with this. What a blessing to spend time together. Isn't that, that's life, right? If you could put it in a bow, that's life. So thanks, Kyle. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the show and appreciate working with you. So thank you.
Yeah, same. Awesome. Thanks.